Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So we're not officially started yet, but we do have opportunity for questions from anyone in the gallery that relate to tonight's agenda. So if you have any questions, now would be the time, and then we can address them either during our deliberations of the agenda itself or right on the spot. It's not mandatory. If you don't have any questions, that's okay too. Wow, could hear a pin drop. Okay, so we'll carry on here in about 3 minutes. Thank you. I have no idea why it's so cold in here. It's not an attempt to have a shorter meeting, I assure you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to bid you all a warm welcome on behalf of Council. I'm going to call our Council meeting to order for Monday, November 18th. First order of business is adoption of the minutes of the Council meeting held November 4th. Do we have that in a motion? Moved by Councillor Neufeld, seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? All right, seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Next up is approval of our agenda. And I need a mover and a seconder that the November 18th, 2013 Council meeting agenda be approved. Moved by Councillor Morison, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any additions, changes to the agenda? All right, seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. We have two delegations this evening, ladies and gentlemen. The first of which is the Pioneer Crescent Neighborhood Residents Association regarding the Shelley Road Center. I see we have some of our Pioneer Crescent residents here, so and I believe if you want to come forward, whomever your delegated spokesperson is, Ms. Beal. And I think you're familiar with the microphone there. Make sure that little red light is on. Very good. And we generally hold these to 10 minutes, and then we allow for some opportunity for Council to ask questions or comments. And the floor is yours. Please, carry on.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, and thank you very much for having us here this evening. My name is Mary Beal, and I am one of the residents in the Pioneer Crescent Neighborhood Residents Association. There we go. And actually have been for a number of years. In fact, was one of the founding chairs of our neighborhood association. And we're here this evening to formally request that the area known as Shelley Park Center be formally designated a municipal park, or a park with the city. I guess it'd be a city park. I don't know. Yeah. Don't get me on any technicalities there. I might make a mistake. Anyway, for some people may be familiar with the history of that area. This piece of land is at the corner of Turner Road and Shelley in Parksville, just off of Pioneer Crescent. And once upon a time, a long time ago, for many, many years, it was actually the site of the City of Parksville Public Works Yard. So it served a very different function in those times. Now, I don't know the exact year right now, but I was certainly in the neighborhood at the time. But the decision was made to move the Public Works Yard to a better location and move it into the industrial park, which had been not that old at that time, actually. And, you know, I certainly applaud that move. Now, at the time, that move was actually facilitated by the use of parks money to allow that move to take place. And it was our understanding, for a number of reasons, that that was kind of like a swap, and that area left vacated by the Public Works Yard would in fact become a de facto park. Around that same time, in fact, our neighborhood had been identified in a newspaper article as being one of the areas in the city that was in need of a neighborhood park for a number of reasons. So following the move of the Public Works Yard, and there were a number of discussions with City Council around the vacated property and what would need to be done in order to improve it, understanding that parks money was also used at that. And also at the same time, what fell into place is there was a program for doing some training with fishermen who might be leaving that occupation to pick up other jobs. And so long and short of it, some development happened with that land. The soil was looked at, the building was looked at and renovated, and it's a very popular place for a number of functions that people use it quite regularly. And the land around it was, you know, grassed, and a few trees were planted, and the neighborhood put up a basketball hoop and so on. So it was actually a bit of a surprise when we realized that it has never formally been designated a park, though, and this came to light a couple of years ago, I suppose. And so that's why we're here this evening, to ask that that be recognized as a park. We also understand that right now it's currently zoned transitional under the recently approved official community plan, and there's a bit of concern from local residents that it could be developed at some point in the future. But we really do see this area being heavily used, and we also appreciate having this little bit of space and green space in the area. So that's why we're here this evening, and we hope that City Council can formally designate Shelley Park or Shelley Center as a municipal park for all of our future generations to enjoy.
All right, thank you very much. So before you go anywhere, I'll open the floor to first perhaps staff. Did Mr. Manson, did you want to shed some sort of light on just the land and its status and all of that, at least in that context, and then we'll open it to council members.
If I may, Your Worship, at the time of the relocation of the Public Works Yard to the Industrial Park, I was the Director of Finance, not in my current position. The history is pretty much bang on of what occurred. Parks funds money were used to buy from the General Revenue Fund the Shelley Road Center, so that we would have money to purchase the Public Works yard in the industrial site. So parks funds were used. In my mind, it is a park, always has been a park, because of the fact that parks funds were used. From a planning perspective, however, I've been told that it isn't technically or officially designated park plan. So it would take a simple resolution from council dedicating the land as park, and that would basically do it.
Which raises an interesting question. So if property is acquired through parks function, does that not automatically essentially designate that land as having to be park? I see a shaking head over there, which is good. Go ahead.
Apparently not. Although as I said, as far as I'm concerned, it was acquired with the use of park funds, and I've always treated it as a park. Any inquiries that anybody has made to me as to its usage. The only dissenter I got is a little bit to my left.
Very good, very good. But I see Mr. Russell's hands up. Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
If I may, Your Worship, to add a level of comfort, it is designated as a mini park within the 2005 Parks and Open Space Master Plan, and that plan is referenced in the OCP with specific policies. It says the city will continue to implement and update the park and community park master plan, and will consider these documents when reviewing development proposals.
Okay, very good. So questions from members of council? Go ahead, Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, in other words, it is a park, and it's already more or less designated a park. My question would be, what type of park are you expecting? We're in a situation where we've been cutting back on a lot of the work done by the Parks Commission, and we've already added another one at Nichols Park. Seems like we have another one there to look after. What did you expect to be done there? Do you want flowers and flower beds and grass cut? And besides that, it's an old building. It must be 100 years old. So there's a problem there in maintaining it as well. So is your community group willing to do some of the work there, or what do you expect in the way of beautification?
Go ahead, Ms. Beal.
Well, certainly my role this evening was not necessarily to talk about, what the plans or what the future of that park would look like, but to really just look at, can we officially get this designated so that the area is protected as such? I think that parkland, just as cities change over time, that some of, what that might look like may in fact change over time. I think I could speak for my neighbors in saying that, we do agree that it's somewhat underdeveloped in a sense right now. Originally, I can't speak about the original view. The original view was to include some kind of little play structure for toddlers, not thinking anything beyond that. But we also thought that that might be something that over time, if we got sponsors with, be it A&W or local, that maybe something could be done there. In the meantime, what it does provide is some open space. Yes, the grass does get cut. There are a few trees. There aren't really a lot of improvements there, nor do I think that we might like to see some improvements over time, but that's not the purpose of our visit here this evening. I understand that the center is quite heavily used, different times maybe more so than others, and that what has been done in recent years is that certain groups have taken on booking of the center and perhaps some of the cleaning of it and so on. And I think that has had mixed results. But what it would actually look like, that wasn't really the purpose this evening, and I don't feel like I could speak on the whole neighborhood's behalf. As to how much we would be able to do, I think that would depend. I mean, every year to year, we have neighbors and residents who are maybe more involved or less involved. Our association looks at coordinating block watch programs and trying to do some things that pull our neighborhood together a few times a year. We work on cleaning up in the flats and do a number of other things, but I can't say that we would have a guaranteed group of people who would be able to work on that. But, one can always hope.
Thank you for that. I don't have too much trouble designating it a park, but as long as the expectations aren't that we're going to have to spend a lot of money on it, because what we've been doing is cutting back somewhat. And as I say, we've already taken on another park, Nichols Park, and it gets to be quite an expensive operation when you start looking after parks, and it depends on your expectation, what you expect. And I think it's a great idea if in such a park as you have there, that if the community there wanted to spruce it up and so on and look after it, I think that'd be great. I think that's what a community is all about. But as far as designating a park, I don't have too much trouble with that. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Councillor Greer. Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Mary, for making the presentation. I appreciate it very much. I would very much like to see that area designated as an official park, so you have my support. One of the questions that I would ask, and actually what Councillor Greer has talked about, is upkeep and that type of thing. The building itself seems to have been just painted a violent pink or purple. Who was responsible for that? Did the city do it, or was it you?
Yo no sé. I have no idea even to what you're referring. I'm sorry. I haven't seen the pink. I'll have to go by. Oh, how about that? Easter color.
Okay.
No,
anyway,
I'm afraid
someone is looking after it.
The only official part that our neighborhood association did many years back was we put up the basketball hoop.
Okay.
So I can't really speak beyond that. I mean, right now it's a fairly, in terms of the grounds, I'd have to say it's very low maintenance, and and certainly it's a little bit lacking, but it's easy maintenance right now, just mowing the lawn. Yeah.
Following up on what Councillor Greer said, though, I mean, the city might have an expectation of your group to be willing to do some work and just to maintain it, to cut it, and to do things of that nature. Much as we might have of the Civic Action Group at Bolinas, and they're supposedly going to be doing some work as far as Nichols Park is concerned. So are you willing to take on that type of role? And that's something that I put out to you, and I'm not saying you have to make a commitment on behalf of the group now.
I can't really say. I can't really answer that question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further comments, questions from council? Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. First, a point of clarification. The city did not recently acquire Nichols Park. The city always has owned Nichols Park, and the students do, in fact, work on Nichols Park. Yes, they do. But thank you very much, Murray, for your presentation and for the request this evening. The Shelley Road Centre has been a little bit of a area of interest to me too, because it is a city-owned property and building, and it does afford us another space for people to hold their community events. I'd like to ask a question first, Your Worship, through you to the, gosh, I can't remember your title, Chief Administrative Officer. Do you know anything about this purple painted building, and if so, who did it and why?
Yes, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Powell-Davidson. As you're aware, we do have an operating agreement with Bard to Broadway folks to book and maintain the building. We have been coordinating the painting of the building with them. We are of the understanding that it was going to be painted a similar color to what it was before. We were kind of surprised when we saw it purple as well. I know that we've asked them what gives. I'm not sure that we've gotten a reply yet.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Manson. May I have a couple more follow-up questions?
A couple? My
Yeah,
goodness. How
just
about
two.
one more? We'll move on.
Then I have to
we
decide.
still have another delegation and a few items.
Yeah, I know. But I'd like to ask a question through you to our Director of Community Planning in regards to a concern that the presenter did express in regards to the zone, that it is zone transitional in the current OCP. So my question to you would be, are their fears confounded? Is that the correct word? Is there any reason for them to fear that this is a possible danger? No? We get two answering.
If I may, Your Worship, the property is owned by the city, so any type of redevelopment would be at Council's wish. That would be the only way that it could change from what it is right now.
And further to that, if you were to designate it as a park, then the likelihood of that occurring becomes virtually nil, since now it's designated as a park.
Okay, I do have one more question for the presenter, but I'll wait till others have had a chance to speak, presuming they want to.
Go ahead, because I was going to wrap it up right after this, and then I was going to talk about a potential motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know that you've been asked, Mary, about the possibility of your neighborhood association tending to the grounds. My interest is more in keeping the building a community user group, you know, and that requires somebody to handle the bookings and the liaisoning with people and making sure it's opened and, you know, well maintained and all that sort of jazz. And the city doesn't take that on at this time. Would that be something that your community group is interested at looking at managing sort of the overall operations in terms of people using it?
Again, I'm not sure that I can fully answer this, but at the same time, what I can say is what I've observed over the past number of years, in that typically a group that has managed that has been a group that has regularly needed and wanted to use such a facility. To be honest, we don't have that kind of a need. We have block watch meetings, which means that, you know, 12 or 13 people maximum would come together for a meeting 3 or 4 times a year, and we do email. So it's not, you know, we're not in need of that same kind of space. So I don't think it's as good a fit. I think that a better fit is, in fact, finding a group, be it Bar to Broadway, which is a wonderful group to have in there, in our opinion. And again, Fred might recall back from early meetings when we met about the building and the kinds of things that might take place in there, that we were hopeful that groups that were interested in community arts and so on would be the sort of groups that would be using the space. But it just seems a more natural fit, you know, a group that really does need that space and to use more of it more frequently than we do.
Okay, so any further must-have questions? So I think ultimately what we have here, again, is a piece of property owned by the city, so there's no tax issue here in terms of how we designate it, since we don't pay taxes to ourselves in effect. We have a facility on there which is still being utilized, and it's my understanding we have no intention to stop utilizing that facility, but there may come a time in the future where the costs are prohibitive to maintaining it, but that's not a bridge we're crossing now. I'm looking over at our staff, and I'm going to suggest to council they could perhaps bring forward a motion to essentially designate this land as park. And normally my staff are very conservative, and I'm seeing nodding heads, so take that as an indication that they probably see no major issue with that. So it's really up to us to decide on whether or not we think this should be formally designated a municipal park. Keep in mind, it was Parks funds that acquired that property originally, so those funds came with the expectation that they would be utilized for some sort of parkland. Councillor Neufeld.
Would I make the motion at this point?
You
I would
absolutely
move
could.
that, in fact, the city so designate the Shelley Road Center as a park for its use indefinitely.
Very good. Do we have a seconder? Oh, 1 second. Go ahead, Mr. Manson.
The correct resolution that would be that Shelley Road Center be designated as parkland in accordance with the Local Government Act.
You're okay with that as the mover?
That's fine.
Okay, so that is the motion. I need a seconder still, and I saw your hand up, so seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. So there you are, Ms. Beal. You now have a municipal park in your neighborhood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to our second delegation and final delegation of the evening, and that is from Parksville Bodyworks Fitness Limited, and is regarding a overhang encroachment at 162 Morison Avenue. Hello. So have a seat. Now, you've probably not presented to council prior to this evening. Okay, so take a deep breath, relax, right? It's local government, so we're your neighbors. And make sure that red light is on as you're discussing it. You probably heard what I had said previously. 10 minutes is generally the max that we allow for this, and it is all yours. Go ahead, sir.
I'm the owner of Bodyworks Fitness in Parksville and Saheli Boutique. We've been operating in Parksville for 12 years, employing 16 people. I'm here to request, well, we're building a second story at 162 Morison Avenue. And there's overhangs right now onto the street, so on the second story, we want to move them up to the top. So we're just requesting if that's okay with the city. And the reasons for that is, well, it's good building practice for one thing. It protects from the elements, you know, wrecking the windows up there and the walls and such. Also, it's protection for pedestrians walking by. We get a lot of parents or spouses dropping somebody off or waiting for rides outside. So there's a place for them to wait while instead of standing out in the pouring rain there. The other thing is the whole street is already like that. Well, I shouldn't say the whole street, but there's lots of other buildings encroaching onto the street already. So we'd be just in line with them. What else is that? Structurally, we can't really put the second story back either, so that would allow for the overhangs because it has to be built right on top of the existing walls. So I understand the reasoning if there's a new building, but in this case, I don't think it can be done any other way.
That's okay. That's it.
That's about it.
Okay, stay right where you are, and I'll open the floor. Maybe with a question first to staff again, although we saw the report, and I think the primary concern here is just the rationale or the manpower involved in maintaining these agreements, which are typically 5 years. These are encroachment agreements, of course, I'm referring to, and the general policies that we have to move away from encroachments, although I take your point that this is a renovation on top. There's already an encroachment on site. Is there an agreement in place with respect to that? No? But I would think that that would have to occur regardless of what's going on here, or how would that look, Mr. Russell?
If I may, Your Worship, at this point our assumption is that they would be proceeding whether or not they were granted the encroachment or not, that they would still proceed with a second floor. So our assumption would be that they would be subject to, should the encroachment agreement be granted, they'd be subject to it. Should it be denied, they would not be in an encroachment situation. If they decided not to proceed, then we would have to look at the matter further.
Okay, but with respect to the present building, I understand there is an encroachment already in existence?
If I may, Your Worship, yes, there is an encroachment in existence. The city has not
entered into an agreement of any kind with regard to that? Okay. Is that something from a policy perspective long-term we're seeking to do where there are encroachments in place?
If I may, Your Worship, certainly, I mean, it's not a requirement, but it's certainly in the best interest of the city wherever they're brought to the city's attention to enter into encroachments agreement, because basically it's a matter of potential liability. For example, if a part of the roof fell on someone walking on the sidewalk, who's responsible for it when it's something that encroaches onto city property?
And for the most part, just for the benefit of anyone else that may not know, we have, in effect, 0 lot lines for the most part in our downtown. Would that be a correct statement or no?
If I may, Your Worship, that is correct, that the zoning setback is 0. The official community plan development permit guidelines for new buildings suggest that the main floor should be 1 meter back, with the second floor 1 meter further.
Right, so that's in context of new building construction, obviously. Okay, I'll open it to members of council. Do you have any questions or comments? So, Councillor Morison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had the good fortune to be in Seattle this weekend, and while it was raining, there's a lot of buildings that are right up to the next to the sidewalk here, and I noticed that after I read this on the ferry on the way down, you're running in between buildings that have nice overhangs that cover you from the rain to ones that are straight up fronted and don't have a lot of form of character, or they're stepped back. I don't really see the issue in this regard. Like you said, there's lots of things. Most of the properties along that way either have large awnings or they have overhangs. This is the kind of development that the city, in my opinion, has been looking for, keeping the same footprint and maximizing the tax base by doubling the floor space of the building. doesn't wear a lot more on our infrastructure, I wouldn't think. So I don't see, I don't have a huge problem with what they're requesting.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a problem with it either. I think it matches what is already there. It's already a form of character of the entire street. And I agree with the fact that the overhang is good for people, as Dale has mentioned, that they have young people and people waiting for buses and waiting for cars and so on, and the overhang is certainly an addition. I don't see where it affects the city in any way, shape, or form. And if it was the only building on the street like that, then I would have trouble with it. But the fact is, they're all out there. They're all the same. And this matches, as far as form and character goes, with the entire street. So I don't have any problem with it at all. And I think this is a business that is certainly welcomed in the city. And Dale hires a lot of people. I think, what did you say, you had 16 employees? That's a lot of employees. And I think we should be a little bit more cooperative. It's difficult as it is to have a business today, let alone having so many restrictions put on business people. And here again, I think we should be a little bit more lenient, and it matches the decor of the rest of the street. Anyways, thank you.
Well, certainly the determination of how lenient we should be is really our determination to make as a council. I think, though, if you're listening carefully, you know, it is in contravention of some of our new policies, certainly in development guideline rules, and so we should keep that in mind. But at the same time, I completely agree with the previous two speakers. But anyone else wishing to address this, go ahead. Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I spent part of the day yesterday walking along Morison and just looking at some of the overhangs and what some of the setbacks are. And I think at Dundee Wealth, they in fact have got a setback, but they still have the overhang. And when I looked at this property, and I thought, okay, one of the issues I think maybe Mr. Russell would speak to is the issue of the utilities, and I would expect sometime in the future all the utilities will be underground as far as this situation is concerned, so that the utilities will not be a factor as far as wires and things overhead. And I don't know the distance between the wires and this type of setback. At least this type of overhang. But I look at it and say there are, much as our other two councillors have mentioned, I see it as being an addition of space that is can be utilized. There's no precedent here with respect to what they have and what they're getting. It's very much in line with what Home Hardware has as far as a large awning is concerned, and so I looked at it and I thought we have to support our business people in the community, and I look at this as being in contravention, but in fact something that we will probably have to go for. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, if a business in downtown Parksville is doing well enough that they need to double their space, I'm really excited about that. But I do have a question through you, Your Worship, through to the Director of Community Planning, who made reference earlier in this discussion about possible, and I believe I understood you correctly, a possible liability with these things falling down. So I guess my question would be, is that a real possibility? Have we had many overhangs falling down on people? And if so, would maybe the owner would be willing to sign a paper saying he'd be in full coverage of anything should his overhang fall down?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell-Davidson. Basically, that's if Council chooses option 1 to support the encroachment. There's basically a draft resolution that would require staff to prepare an encroachment agreement with the property owner, and the property owner would execute that agreement, and that would provide some mitigation of liability for the city.
All right. Do we have any further comments? Okay. I think we will obviously be addressing this in the report section that's just coming up. So thank you very much for the presentation. Don't go anywhere because we'll be coming right back to this subject here very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, first into the correspondence section this evening, we do have a piece of correspondence from the Regional District of Nanaimo regarding a swimming pool service amendment bylaw. And you'll note that there is a corresponding resolution as well, or at least a recommendation at this stage. Before I ask for a mover and a seconder, did you want to just touch on this a little bit, Mr. Manson? As I see our director is not available this evening, I can touch on it as well if you like.
If I may, Your Worship, what the Regional District is proposing is a change in the funding formula for both Oceanside Place and Ravensaw Aquatic Center. Currently, they're both funded 100% based on the assessed values of the communities. With this change, they're proposing to amend it so that the funding is based on 50% assessed value, 50% usage. And the schedule that I passed out to Council shows the expected shift in cost as a result. And for those that are in the audience, for 2014, it would essentially mean that Parksville's cost would go up about $11,300. Qualicum Beaches would go up about $6,000. Area would go down about $8,000. Area F would go up $500. Area G would go up $10,500. Area H would go down $20,000.
So is everyone understanding what this really is all about in terms of the regional services that are provided? Basically, as our CAO has indicated, there's this discussion, and I was part of this discussion certainly around the regional district boardroom, that there needs to be some fair formulations applied to how our services are utilized. And you can see that right now folks in Area H who travel potentially all the way from Deep Bay are paying quite a significant portion of the overall cost of those services, and then the folks that are closer to those services, such as ourselves, the town of Qualicum Beach, and certainly Area G, may be underpaying based on the number of our residents that ultimately utilize both the pool and the ice sheets. So this is something I'm supportive of. In this particular circumstance, yes, it transfers a little bit of cost into those areas, but I think a 50% assessment and a 50% usage-based formulation is about as fair as you can get. And I know there was a lot of discussion at the boardroom table in Nanaimo about how to come about this, and that was the end result. And I believe virtually everyone around the table, at least at that time, were in agreement, in principle anyway. So if there's someone here who could be prepared to move that recommendation, we can discuss further. So moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Morison. So we now have a motion before us that would, in a sense, accept this new formulation, at least from the City of Parksville's perspective. Is there any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
I'm just curious, what happens if we don't accept this?
Well, we'd have to go back to the drawing board, I think, and have a further discussion around the boardroom table, as we're a key component of it. I can't really answer your question, though. We would have to basically have further discussion. But I do know that at the time, if I recall correctly, and I'm sure Director Lefebvre would support this, there was a lot of discussion around it, and for the most part, at that time, everyone understood the rationale. It's fundamental fairness, really, is what this is. Okay. No further questions, comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, moving on to the reports section for this evening. And Mr. Russell, could you give us the background with respect to our delegation and the consideration of a roof overhang encroachment at Bodyworks Fitness 162 Morison Avenue?
Sure, if I may, Your Worship. As was presented in the earlier delegation, the City has received a request from Carson Jensen Architect on behalf of the property owner to allow for the encroachment of a roof overhang above a public sidewalk on Morison Avenue. The existing first-story roof encroaches by approximately 34 inches from the property line. That's proposed to be removed, with a new second-story roof that is proposed to area encroach by 0.711 meters or 28 inches above the property line over the sidewalk. And the report basically outlines two different options for council consideration.
All right, thank you very much. The staff recommendation is to deny, but on page 25 there is an alternative resolution should council wish to ultimately move forward with an agreement and an allowance for this encroachment. And I see Councillor Morison, I take it you're moving that recommendation on page 25?
Yes, option 1, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Greer. And further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Worship. Question through you to the Director of Community Planning in regards to the form and character of the outside of the building. Will this be going to the advisory design panel?
If I may worship through to Councillor Powell-Davidson, yes, it will as part of a separate development permit process, and that's actually what's triggered this review and this request today. But yes, the form and character will go to the design panel.
Further comments, questions on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, moving on to Report B. And again, Mr. Russell, could you give us the background with respect to the consideration of the development of a community energy and emissions plan, please?
If I may, Your Worship, a lot of communities in British Columbia, and Parksville is also one, have set greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. It's a provincial expectation in the future. A lot of grant funding, et cetera, will be tied into to basically how we're doing as far as greenhouse gas reduction targets. What a community energy plan is, it's kind of taking those sort of higher level goals of reducing targets and trying to basically identify some sort of low-hanging fruit that the city can utilize to improve our efforts in moving towards sustainability, particularly with respect to energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions. Basically, BC Hydro has a program that they've done. It's a fairly modest community energy plan and emissions plan, but basically they conduct a day-and-a-half workshop, a webinar, and then basically help prepare about a 30-page community energy plan. But it gives a really good starting point for Parksville to have an energy plan to know how we're doing today, as well as to set some goals going forward on how we can achieve those. It does require a little bit of, obviously, staff time as a commitment. It may require some council time. If council feels positive about this, then we would develop a basic work program that kind of outlines, what will happen in a bit more detail. But it's certainly an opportunity should council wish to avail it, but obviously it may impact other council priorities.
All right, thank you for that. So we have a couple of options here before us. The recommendation is simply to receive for information. There is an option on page 32, which would be ultimately to authorize the joining of this program and appointing our Director of Community Planning as a project lead. So Mr. Manson, and perhaps Mr. Russell as well, or through yourself, Mr. Manson, to Mr. Russell. I note that your recommendation is simply to receive for information. You didn't go ahead with the recommendation to do the analysis component. Is there a rationale behind that? Would you think it might be wise to come back with a work plan first for council's proper consideration, or how do you feel about it? I mean, this potential here is to make you project lead of this, right? So,
if I may, Worship, If I may, Worship, we're more than capable of it. It's really if council has other priorities. That's the only reason why we didn't. We're quite happy to do it. We have to let Hydro know by, I think it's December the 12th, I believe it is. It's outlined in the report. So we don't really have a lot of time to do a formal work program, and that's the main reason. So, I mean, as I said, we would be happy to do it if that's what council wants.
All right, well, let's open it up to council before we get a motion on the floor, because I'm just curious. Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld, and then Councillor Greer after.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I looked at this and I thought, okay, what's happening here? And what appears to be happening is that BC Hydro is downloading another piece of work onto the municipality, and in fact, we get no recompense for it. We may get a benefit in the long term, but I'm not sure what the benefit is going to be as far as emissions. I mean, I would ask this question of Mr. Manson, if you would, through you. do we not check on our emissions? And we have a situation where we have to look at gas house emissions, and we have carbon tax payouts and this type of thing. We're already doing some of this, so to what extent do we have to be involved with the SEEP program of BC Hydro?
Mr. Manson?
If I may, Your Worship, this is more of a community-oriented program than a specifically City of Parksville program. Just behind it is for the community as a whole to reduce their emissions. And this would be at least the start of an educational program for the citizens of Parksville, things that they could do to reduce their energy use. Not so much the city, but you as an individual in your household, the same as the rest of the councillors, the same as the rest of the citizens in the city of Parksville. So it's not necessarily geared towards specifically the corporation of the city of Parksville. It's more geared for the residents of Parksville.
Thank you. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Neufeld. This is just another project that the BC Hydro is handing down to the city, and there will be costs involved, there will be time involved, and it's just a feel-good situation. You know, when you look at the carbon around the world, what we would do here would be not even on any kind of a scale. I mean, that's why our country, along with most of the other countries, have dropped out of the Kyoto Protocol Accord, because other countries, such as China, which is burning about 4 billion tons of coal a year, are not complying to any of these things. So, and I could list, as long as as people are driving cars and we're burning 90 million barrels of oil a day driving our cars, something that we might do in Parksville is going to be neither here nor there, believe me. And it's just another thing that our city staff would have to put together. And at the end of the day, we wouldn't make one iota of any difference. So I would not be in favor of it.
Okay, so I should probably do my job appropriately here and actually bring a motion to the floor. So you have a couple of choices there, and I'm looking at the speakers if you wish. You could simply move to receive this, and you've received it. That would not be an indication of joining in with the program at all. Or you could, of course, alternatively move the other motion, which is on page 32. Go ahead, Councillor Greer.
Well, I could make the motion to table it, however, or to receive it, I should say. But I'm not in favor of it just going on and we have to discuss it again another time. So I would not be in favor of accepting this at all.
Okay, well, as long as we don't bring a motion forward, that actually puts us into a position of partnership with this particular program. We aren't accepting it. And, you know, even if we moved a motion that said, thou shalt not ever consider doing this, we can't tie the hands of a future council anyway, so it could very well come up again. Or alternatively, we could look at other communities as they engage in it, and I have a feeling that that opportunity might be available down the road as well, and we might have a bit better sense of what's being achieved and what's being done.
So your suggestion is just to receive it?
Just a motion to receive.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, move to receive, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. Okay, so on any further discussion required? Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am pleased that we're going to just receive this, because I don't think we have enough information. I'm feeling really pressured to make these decisions very quickly, given the short timeline and everything. But there's some other factors to consider. I understand that it's necessary for a community to have some kind of a program that is aware of the energy, saving energy and greenhouse gas emissions and all that. And I think we do need to continually be working towards that. I believe that. I know that Fortis also has some programs available, and I would hope that we would visit those at some point in time. But I'm pleased to just have this received today. I just wanted to ask the staff question in regards to given the short timeline and given that we have so many other things to work on, do they I know they said they would make time to do this, but is it a prudent move to accept something like this with such a short timeline at this time? Or is this, in their view, really, really important and we shouldn't miss this opportunity? I mean, I pretty well have my mind made up because I don't like being pushed into making these snap decisions. And on the other hand, we do need to be conscious of our environment and our waste. And ultimately, the money that we're spending on hydro is huge. So, but do they feel that this is a good program, and should we not miss this opportunity, or is it okay, in their opinion, that we hold off for now? That's what I want to know.
Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
If I may, Richard, that's a tough question to answer. Is it a good program? Well, we won't know until we get the result. So the reality is, at this point, it's really just us dedicating a bit of time to participate in the program to know what the result will be. I anticipate what it'll primarily be is basically an assemblage of statistics that the province has on emission targets, which are fairly available presently. But what it will do is it will try to identify sort of opportunities that the city may have going forward. Like, do you have a sustainability checklist? Yes or no? Have you, are you a solar power? Have you signed on onto the solar building thing? Yes or no? And it sort of basically would spell out a future game plan of things the municipality can achieve. As far as the deadline goes, there's a deadline to make a decision whether or not to be a participant in the program. The actual participation wouldn't have to occur until sometime in March. Obviously, it would change our work program a little bit, so what maybe other council priorities may be bumped slightly to fit into that time frame. As far as a number of communities do have community energy plans. Some have paid consultants to do kind of the 120-page version. This is really community energy plan light, but in the reality is, given how new this all is, it's probably, if someone was to develop a community energy plan, the more basic model is probably the right approach. I don't know how you could write 120 pages on the topic, to be quite honest, but so as I said, it's really council decision if they want us involved in this process or not. We don't really have a strong opinion either way.
All right, there you go. And I just have a sneaky suspicion this opportunity might be available another year down the road or so, and there might be more information available at that time as how it's working, if they're getting results, etc. That's just my sneaky suspicion. So, any further comments, questions? So we have a motion simply to receive. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. All right, Mr. Butterworth. Our next item, ladies and gentlemen, is from the Director of Finance, and this is the 2013 Budget Variance Report, which you'll find pages 39 to 46 to follow along.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So this is my quarterly report on how we're doing against budget, and I've mentioned this in the past. We don't do the first quarter or even the second quarter because they're not going to serve a lot of purpose. In the first quarter, we haven't really got a lot of our programs underway yet. A lot of our revenues haven't come in, so it's really not going to tell you much. And in the second quarter, our revenues have started to come in, but we're still only haven't really got a lot of the work programs underway yet either. So, or they're just getting started at that time for the summer capital projects and stuff. So we end up doing it at the end of September just to give you guys a picture of where we're at, and then we try and do one at the end of the year as well. So what I'm going to be presenting here is in the council agenda. There's a summarized version and a detailed version, and I'm just going to be going through the summarized version. So on our revenues, property taxes, penalties and interests, the second penalty had not been applied as of this point in time, so we've got a budget shortfall of around $38,000. The penalty has now been applied, and we're now up to $103,000 as our revenues, so we're about $10,000 short still. When we apply the interest charges to the end of the year, we should be coming in right around budget, so we won't have a problem there. The interest revenue looks like it's doing really well. It is doing well, but it's not that well, because what we have in here is all of our interest goes into one account, and then it gets allocated out at the end of the year to the water fund, to the sewer fund, and to all of our reserve funds based on what their balances are. So this allocation hasn't happened yet, so we're not going to be doing that well on our investment interest by the end of the year. Planning and engineering fees are quite a bit higher than budget, and also higher than 2012. So this is indicating development interest out there, where they're coming in and researching or applying for various developments. But it hasn't translated on the ground yet, as you can see by the building permits, where we're quite a bit short of our budget amount, and we're actually short behind last year at this point as well. So hopefully when the planning and engineering fees go a lot higher, then maybe in the following year it may translate to something on the ground. So we can hope for that. With Rennes Road happening and the other one down on Corfield and Despard, then if start building something on there, then that will help with the building permits next year. On to expenses. At this point, everything in our expenses is pretty well on budget or under budget. There isn't anything standing out as going over budget where we have a concern at this point in time. Long-term debt on here looks like we're well under budget at 49% spent to the end of September, but that's because our debt comes in the spring, and then the second debt payments come after September 30th. So by the end of the year, that'll be on budget. RCMP also looks like it's well under budget. That's due to the third quarter RCMP billing is not in there yet. They're usually quite a bit behind. We have got that third quarter billing now, which was close to $500,000. So we're at around 1.5 million in there now, as opposed to just over 1 million. RCMP will come in a little bit under budget by the end of the year. At this point in time, I think they're at 14.2 officers, and we're budgeting for 16. So by the end of the year, we should end up with a little surplus in there. Fire department also only at, there's still 30-40% left in the budget. They have a couple big items that get charged into that department or get spent at the end of the year. One of them being the volunteer indemnities, and the other one is the annual hydrant maintenance. The water fund, the water department looks after maintaining the hydrants, but they get charged back to the fire department at the end of the year. So there's two big items there that will come in and bring the fire department more in line with their budget. In the community development, the OCP, this was the final year of carry forwards on the OCP budget, and it's showing at 42,000 under budget. So we didn't actually need all of the OCP monies that we had budgeted. So planning department brought it under budget. Public works, again, 65% of the budget spent at this point in the year. A couple big items just to identify is snow removal is only 8% of the budget is spent, and so that means that very little had to be spent in the spring. There wasn't any significant snowfalls from January to March, and so we've still got a significant part of the budget left for November, December. So the way it's looking right now, we could end up quite a bit under budget.
Don't say that.
You never know.
Don't say that.
You never know. The snowfall could be
All
coming
right.
tomorrow.
All right. We fully expend to spend that
yeah.
money. Just
We can only hope. And road rehabilitation at the end of September only had 46% spent as well. So I think they have done some more since then, but at that point in time, it was well under budget. So. And in the other minor capital is the other major one where we're quite a bit under budget. There's a couple big projects in there that are just getting started and will probably have to be carried forward. One of them is the drainage master plan. I think it's a $150,000 budget. I believe it's just getting underway. drainage easements, there's a large budget in there for that as well, and as those are getting settled, we're still well under budget in that area. And there's also an IT needs assessment that hasn't had that much spent on it as of this time. So those are some of the bigger items in the minor capital that haven't been spent.
So, Mr. Butterworth, give us 1 second. I see a question from Councillor Greer.
Just a couple of things. The parks, you're way under budget, and public works. Is that going to make much change in parks and public works between now and the end of the year?
Mayor, Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, the public works was the one I was just talking about with the snow removal and the road rehabilitation. So if we don't get any snow, then we are going to have a budget surplus in the snow removal area. If we get a bunch of snow, that could be eaten up. I think it takes about 3 heavy snowfalls to eat up that budget. So,
and the parks?
And the parks, I would have to pass that one on. I haven't looked at the parks real closely. They're at 62% spent at this point in time to the end of September. Mr. Metcalf may have some comments on that. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Your Worship. With regards to the parks budget, I did check today, and we're approximately 85% through the year, and we're 80% spent. We did have a few challenges this year with staffing. As you know, there was some changes with staff. That aside, there's been a couple areas in parks where the budget hasn't been spent that we anticipated. One was actually goose control. With the community park this year, we redid the field. And with that, we've spent very little in goose control, or goose feces control. So we have actually saved a considerable amount of money there. So that represents a portion of it. The other thing is we did slightly reduce levels of service in some areas that you may or may not have noticed. We didn't put up banners this year as one. Hadn't had any response to that. So there was a certain savings in that. So there's a couple areas that would represent that.
Yeah, I did think about those things, and I'm very pleased that we're coming in under budget.
Oh, just 1 more second before you carry on. Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Mr. Butterworth, as far as the easements are concerned, are those the easements along Banks Avenue, and what are we talking about as far as drainage is concerned? Possibly I should be asking Mr. Figuera with respect to the public works and the road works and that type of thing. Where is it being done, or why is it being backed up as far as the costing is concerned?
Yeah, if I may, Your Worship, I would like to pass that one on because I really don't know too much about the easements. I just know that they're well under budget right now. So I'm not sure if it's the Director of Admin or Engineering that would know about the but there is budgets around $100,000 in that area.
Who would like to field that? Mr. Figuera.
If I may, Your Worship, lucky. The easements, can I see where that entry is? I'm not sure where the entry is here.
The easements are under minor capital in the engineering area.
It's not listed, I don't think, is it?
Yeah, it's not going to be listed separately. It's just part of the minor capital budget.
Oh, it's part of the minor capital budget. Well, in general, we're the easements. If I think it's the item I'm thinking about, the easements are. We're trying to identify those utilities we have, city-owned utilities that are within private property that do not have easements, and obviously, where possible, we're trying to get some rights over those properties. It's a notoriously long and difficult negotiation that goes on with every property owner. Some years our success rate is higher than others. We did manage to get the Director of Administration was most of the effort there, but we did manage to get some easements in place. But that's the difficulty with that. It depends on depends on how many properties are affected. It depends on the cooperation of the property owners in trying to get those rights. So some years we'll do good, and some years we'll have a surplus. That's about all I have for that.
Everybody's familiar with kind of what he's talking about, these easements, city infrastructure, kind of. In effect, it can be through a result of an error that was made, could be decades ago, and as we continue to need to replace infrastructure, we're coming into these situations where we have our infrastructure on private property, but we don't have any sort of rights in place for access, an easement in effect. And so you can imagine the property owner, when all of a sudden out of the blue the city comes a knocking, they're looking for some level of compensation to provide that encumbrance, which it in effect is, on their land. And that can be a very laborious negotiated process, and I know that a number of our staff were working very hard not all that long ago on one such scenario, which actually represented multiple property owners, not just one. And I suspect if there's unspent funds in that budget, it's a result of just the ongoing negotiations and the need to have those dollars there so that we can secure these agreements. But until such time as we have those securities in place, that money remains in budget. Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Just as a follow-up to that, Your Worship, is this holding up any of our capital budgeting, as far, at least capital projects, as far as infrastructure is concerned?
I don't believe so, but go ahead, Mr. Figuera.
If I may, Your Worship, no, this is not holding up any of our capital programs at the moment.
And this really does date back decades. It's before our time here, and there were just mistakes made. And as we digitize our records and go through all these things, we're starting to discover these things along the way. All right, Mr. Butterworth, carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I was down to the last item, just amortization. We record that all at year, and that's amortization of our capital assets. So that's all I have for the operating expenditures. Capital expenditures, you can see we are well under budget. The one area that looks over on this is the administration, and that basically is just a budget transfer because the parkland purchase we made at the end of Shelley Road for the Rathtrevor Trail, the money, it's actually land purchase and it goes under the administration budget, but the budget is actually sitting in parks. So it's just a matter of us doing a transfer of the budget from parks to admin. So admin looks like it's way over budget when in fact it's actually under budget, and parks looks like it's way under budget. But once we take the $750,000 out of there and put it in admin, then that will balance those budgets out. The fire other project on here is mainly relating to their training tower. I think there was a delay because of how they wanted to build it and relating to containers, and I think that's sorted out now, so I believe they're starting to move ahead with that project. The major public works capital projects, you see we've got 80% of the budget left. So the ones that are outstanding are Temple Street, which is currently in design stage or in stages with the consultants, Corfield Street and Banks Avenue. So these projects were all budgeted to actually be worked on this year, so they're going to need to be carried forward to next year because the actual work is going to be taking place next year. So that's all I have for capital. So before I move on to the other funds, I just wonder if there's any more questions on the general fund.
I see one, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Just a quick one, Your Worship, through to Mr. Butterworth. You just talked about carrying over budgets from this year to next year, and just going back to the S word, I understand we could be in for quite a wicked winter. If we don't blow all the snow budget this year, can we carry that over?
Yeah, through Your Worship to the Councillor. If you're just talking about the snow budget, if we do end up with a surplus in there, we've already created a reserve for snow removal. We've been doing that as we've been under budget in some years because we've been severely over budget in other years where we have some heavy snowfall. So if we are under budget, I wouldn't want to carry forward or put all all of that money into reserve, but our reserve is getting to be healthy, so we'd probably put another 20 or 30,000 into that reserve, and then we'd have a sufficient reserve balance for those really bad years.
And I suppose at some point we could simply look at that and say perhaps we're budgeting too much. But again, we're tempting fate here by even having this conversation. So, yeah, very good. All right, no further questions before Mr. Butterworth moves on? All right, go ahead, sir.
Okay, on to onto our water fund. The water billings are slightly exceeding our budget. So we're almost 49,000 over budget in there. I didn't do a lengthy analysis on why that is. It could be due to a little bit higher water consumption in the summer than what we were estimating. Anyways, we're 49,000. It's only 1.6% over. The operating expenditures show 49% left. There's some items in here that get charged later in the year or at the end of the year from our general fund. All of our staffing, management staff are all charged to the engineering department or to public works, and so a portion of their costs and portion of the yard costs, portion of IT costs will all get charged into the water and sewer funds at the end of the year. So when those charges get in, then we won't be so far under budget. Also, major programs for cross-connection control and water meter replacements are delayed again, mainly due to staffing shortage. They're approximately $290,000 under budget for the two programs at this point in time. I think we had one staff in there that was hired to work on the water replacement, water meter replacement, and he was only with us for a few months and moved on. So unfortunately, that one is still behind schedule. Works adjacent to development contingency has not been required yet, so minor capital is well under budget. And amortization, again, is recorded at year end, so that should come in around budget. And again, with the capital expenditures are relating to the same projects that I mentioned before, being Temple Street and Corfield Street being two of the main ones that haven't started yet, so the expenditures are well under budget. That's all I have on the water fund.
All right, go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. We haven't got anything in here with respect to, I shouldn't say we don't. But I look at the ASR and the costing. We have cost allocation from the ASR is $129,000, and we're that will be done at the year end. I guess the concern that I have is that given that we seem to have a possible problem here with respect to the aquifer being a non-contained aquifer. Can you see the issue of operating expense going up significantly to do anything to bring that into a containment situation, or what? How are we going to work with the aquifer as far as costing is concerned? Can you respond to that in any fashion?
I'm not aware of any of that, so that would have to be referred on to another staff member.
I'll have to ask
Well,
Mayor.
I'd like to ask you, what we have a problem with an uncontained aquifer? I didn't follow that.
For whatever reason, I have come across some information that in fact it is not a contained aquifer, and that's the concern that I have with respect to the use of this situation. And I don't know, and I'm asking the question at this point. Have we finished the testing, and have we got the final results on that?
We're still in the testing phase, but I don't have information such as whatever you've utilized or secured that would suggest that it's an unconfined aquifer. No, it's responding as expected during the testing phase.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, just one point of clarification on the capital for the water fund as well. As Councillor Neufeld mentioned, the ERWS capital works, again, are all charged at year-end as well, so they're not in there. So there is quite a significant amount of that is relating to ERWS for the water treatment plant, the new intake, and ASR. So they'll be charged in there at year-end. Those projects at this point are all under budget, so we'll be carrying that budget forward to next year as well. Onto the sewer fund. Revenues are pretty close to budget. Operating expenditures, same thing as I mentioned in the water. We've still got some charges from the general fund that will go in there, and that will bring us closer to budget. And minor capital is sewer master plan and easements are two of the bigger items in there, as well as works adjacent to development. And as you can see, they're all well under budget. The sewer master plan is now underway or imminently underway, is underway. So we should get a few costs in there for the year, but we'll have to carry the rest of the budget forward to next year to finish that plan. And easements, I think the costs actually that are in there relating to some legal costs for one of the easements that have been settled, but again, they're haven't cost us so far as much as what we have in the budget. And that's all I have for the sewer fund.
All right, thank you. Any questions on sewer or any of the other information? All right, carrying on with AWS, ERWS.
Okay, so the Aerosmith Water Service, we're well under budget at this point in time. The maintenance costs are only 15% of the budget to the end of September. So I would suspect that we're going to come in under budget in that, in the AWS, and in the Englishman River Water Service, we're still have 44% budget left. Fairly small budget, and in the capital expenditures, as I just mentioned, there are still some more costs coming in. There's ongoing consulting costs relating to the design of the intake and treatment that we'll be getting some costs for before the end of the year, as well as ASR costs. So it will come in under budget, but that budget money is still going to be needed and have to be carried forward to next year. And PCTC, 31% of the budget remaining. We're pretty close there. And development cost charges. So our DCC collections, as you can see, are well under what we had in our budget. We were expecting to collect $1.7 million from our 2007 DCC plan. As you can see, we've only collected $348,000, and even as of this date today, we still haven't collected any more than that, so we haven't had any further collections in October or November.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are all the DCC funds in that you're expecting for this year, or are there some more coming in? It seems like we're a long ways off our projected budget.
2007 projection, though.
Yeah, that's based on our 2007 DCC plan, and we've been behind that for a number of years, and you say we are going to be updating that plan fairly shortly, actively working on it right now. So it just hasn't been as much development. Now, whether we're expecting any more before the end of the year, I had that discussion with the Director of Community Planning, and it's a bit of an unknown. There is potentially Wren's Road, if they're ready, they could come in and do their subdivision, and they have to pay for all the lots that they subdivide at the time when that happens. So if they come in, there could be a large influx of it. Otherwise, it's going to be next year when they come in and do that. So probably going to be next year, I would suspect. But
so it's something we got to take a long look at, increasing the DCCs then. And I know you're working on it, so. Anyways, we'll leave that for another day. Thank you.
The other one that's out there as well that has fairly large DCCs is the one around the mall, the area around the development in the mall. If that comes in before the end of the year, then there could be some, I mean, it wouldn't be 1.7 million in DCCs, but that would add to DCCs.
Follow up, Councillor Greer.
Is there any news on the mall? What's happening there? I mean, I get it asked a dozen times a day. Are plans still to go ahead?
I would have to defer that question on to somewhere else because I don't hear about those either.
I'd like to send the hardest questions to Mr. Russell. Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
If I may, Your Worship, it seems to be my lot in life. Certainly, we've had inquiries from the mall. Certainly, they're still interested. It's just the time frame may not be as soon as some folks would like. But as far as I'm aware, they still are actively pursuing their proposals. But as said, timelines may be adjusted slightly.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Your Worship. I guess some other information that I'm privy to. From what I understand from the people in Canadian Tire, they're looking forward to moving into the mall. They, in fact, are quite willing to go forward with it. They're asking for an exclusivity as far as lease is concerned, though, with respect to a couple of their soft goods stores. But they're fully intending on looking at it and going forward with it. I think that you may have seen some indication that this is, in fact, a situation they're working with, in that they're now putting forth their Sport Check flyers in our papers now, which they were not doing. They're trying to build up some business, and this is information that I have from Calgary. So it will go forward. I'm sure it will be done. It's a matter of when it gets done, but it's a case that they're looking forward to being in our market.
Carry on, Mr. Butterworth.
Okay, all I have left is my summary, and I don't know if council wants me to regurgitate what I've already stated. There's nothing new in here.
You sleeping well at night, Mr. Butterworth? In terms of the 2013 budget, it looks like we're going to come in a little bit under at least.
Yes, we do have some areas where we're going to come in quite a bit under, such as the RCMP. Everyone else's budget, there's nothing of concern at this point in time that we're going to be over budget. So yeah, I think we're going to be okay this year. And as usual, we're not supposed to overspend our budget, so we always come in a little under. So.
Which is very good. Any final questions, comments from council? Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Butterworth. Excellent presentation. And can you tell me, you just said that we're going to come in quite a bit under for the RCMP, and I'm guessing that's because their initial projections were to employ a new officer every year, and it hasn't proven necessary to do so. Is that where the under budget cause is coming from?
If I may, Your Worship, through to the councillor, what usually happens in the RCMP is they end up with vacancies from someone going on some kind of leave. It could be maternity leave, or someone transfers out and they don't get a member replace them for a period of time. Someone could be off on some kind of medical leave, other things like that. So it seems like every year we're always down at least one officer on average for the year because of absences. They might be down 2 or 3 at one point. They get up to full complement, then they go down another 1 or 2, and it sort of averages out at the end of the year where we're down from instead of 16 officers, and we end up paying for 15. On the last bill I just got, it actually showed it at 14.2 officers. So we're having a saving there. The other thing that happened is last year, I was just seeing if I had it noted in here, which I didn't, but when they the RCMP is not on a calendar year basis or on a fiscal year that ends March 31st. So at the end of March 31st, they reconcile the total cost for the previous year with us with their actual costs, because they're billing us on an estimate, and so then they reconcile it, and then they either charge us a little more or give us a refund. Almost every year that I've been in municipal government, it's been a refund except for one where we actually did have to pay more. This year we got a refund. I don't think it was high, but I'm trying to remember what it was. I'm thinking in the $40,000 range from the previous year. So that'll contribute to our surplus as well.
All right, so if I see no further questions, we do still need to receive this report, and I'd look for a motion to that effect. So Councillor Morison, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Butterworth, and we'll look forward to seeing the final numbers when they arrive. All right, moving on, we have another report, and this is from our fire chief, and that's regarding the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department 2013 Strategic Plan Review. Chief Banks, did you want to make the presentation from your present location, or do you want to sit in the very special chair at the center?
Oh, we're
You're
fine
good
here,
there?
Your Worship. Yeah.
All right, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship. The purpose of this report is to introduce to Council the Fire Department's strategic plan for 2013 to 2018. The plan looked at some key areas of the department's operation, including staffing, facilities, apparatus, equipment, delivery of services, health and safety programs, and emergency preparedness program. The idea of this plan was to give the department a guideline to follow for future decisions, and the recommendation is as per the agenda.
So we do have a recommendation there, Council, and I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson, and discussion. Well, I know you've done a significant amount of work. I know through our communications department how much work you've done with getting the community involved and whatnot, and I think overall it's a very good plan. The one area that causes me great concern, Chief, and I know we've addressed this a little bit, is in the area of emergency preparedness. When I see 25 volunteers and 9 reception centers or service centers, that's something I think we really do need to spend some time and focus on, and we certainly touch on that in this strategy. Is there another area of great challenge that you think we're going to have to spend a lot of time and focus on?
Nothing that stands out in particular. I guess the one big thing is sort of the recruitment and retention of our volunteers and supporting them.
Now, the strategy to date has been actually, and it's again shown in the document, is that you spend a lot of time training, obviously bringing out to a perhaps higher standard than you might find in a number of non-career departments. Is that certainly something that I see recommended to continue on, right? And I think that's very important, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct, Your Worship. As an example, so far this year, we've put in over 6,000 person hours of training to get our members trained up. We typically have a new recruit class every year. We're starting to work on developing some more potential members for potential officers. As part of our strategic plan, the succession plan was covered not only the career members, but also some of our volunteer officers that may be getting near the end of their service with the department, and identifying individuals to come up and fill those experienced shoes.
Yeah, very good. And do you feel confident that as part of the strategy we will be able to offer some of our facilities for some of the area departments as a way to perhaps integrate with them a little more and even generate some additional revenues?
Yes, Your Worship. We have been talking with the other departments in the area, and they're aware of our plans for the training grounds. We're not trying to duplicate anything that's already out there. We're looking at, a little bit different. We're not looking at putting in a live fire training facility or that. That's a very expensive project, and we have one 20 minutes down the road that we're able to use. Just something that we can use, and other departments in the area will be able to come down, and they've expressed interest in coming in and using it, and at a cost recovery sort of idea.
Well, I certainly get the impression that yourself and your department seem to have taken on a bit of a leadership role in the area, and I think kudos to you for that. And I certainly hear very positive comments from some of the other jurisdictions about our fire department. So I think those are well deserved and well earned. So go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Chief. In reading this document, I was really quite impressed with what you've done here. I think that there was one question that I have, though, and it deals with the assumptions, and I spoke with you earlier before the meeting concerning where we're going. And actually, I would like to see all of council and you and your officers meet and have a discussion with respect to the assumptions that you were under when you've made this document. I mean, we talk about boundary expansion, we talk about population growth, talk about building the stock, talking about the requirement for new apparatus and facilities. All of those things are inherent in the document, and what it really looks upon is continued growth and expansion, possibly expansion of our boundaries. So I'm concerned about some of the issues that are sort of latent, sitting out there and not properly addressed. And what I would like to see is, before this document is fully received, is a discussion amongst council and open to the public, and with you and your officers involved. I think some really significant assumptions are being made here, and I would like to go forward, but I would first like to have a look at exactly what those assumptions are, sir. Thank you.
Well, I think in terms of assumptions, a good strategy always assumes there are going to be certain things occurring in the future. Population growth, we already have projections in our OCP of about 1.5%. That would be what would be utilized there. Boundary expansion, I don't see a reason to have a discussion around that. There's no move right now to expand boundaries, but that potential always exists, and it might be a council 6 years from now that's going to face that question. Ultimately, I really disagree with the need to have a discussion on those points, because I think those are all either well understood or impossible to ascertain at this time, but a strategy should reflect upon those possibilities, certainly. Anything that's related to dollars is going to come back to us in terms of budget discussions in any case, so we will obviously have opportunities to discuss those issues as they arise, or perhaps those that succeed us. All right, are we ready to call the question? Now, do we have, refresh my memory, we do have this on the floor. Yes, we do. You two made the motion and seconded. So without further ado, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, moving on to Report E. Mrs. Comas, can you give us the background with respect to the insurance requirements for special events?
Yes, Your Worship. At the November 4th council meeting, council requested staff review the city special events policy with respect to the requirement for insurance for user groups. Staff have prepared the report with an excerpt from the policy, which notes that for events where there are 100 or more participants, the city requests that liability insurance is undertaken and that the city is named as a co-insured along with the user group. Out of 214 events last year, this covered about 10 events, and there have been no concerns and no problems with the current policy as it is being applied. And so for that reason, staff are recommending that we continue with business the way we have done in the past, and the details are as per the staff report and the recommendations as per the agenda.
So we have a recommendation, which is now being moved as a motion by Councillor Greer. Do we have a seconder? By Councillor Powell-Davidson, so we can discuss it. Go ahead, Councillor Morison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just questioning the necessity to have a $5 million liability across the board, not less than $5 million liability. I don't know, I haven't pulled insurance for a few years now, but I know there was a dramatic shift between $1 and $2 million liability policies and up to $5. Is that a common occurrence, or are we overextending the necessity, seeing as we already have our own insurance in place as well?
Go ahead, Mrs. Thomas.
The amounts that we have in our insurance are pretty much the norm across municipalities, and this is not an issue that is unique to Parksville. Because there are commonalities with these kinds of problems, our insurer, MIA, is looking at products for introduction in 2014 or possibly 2015 that would provide an economical means for user group insurance. One of the issues that we face with covering these organizations ourselves is that should there be an event and a claim, then it's our insurance that pays for it, opposed to the user group's insurance. And so our deductible is at risk, our future premiums are at risk, and that affects the community as a whole.
Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was really torn on this one because, number one, we must have insurance to ensure that the city is protected. Number two, we must have these wonderful events that great volunteers work so hard to put together. I would like to ask a question through you to the Director of Administrative Services, Ms. Gomez. You just said to us that the MI, or the Municipal Insurance Authority, is that correct?
Association, yeah.
Association is looking at providing some insurance for municipalities so that we won't have to deal with this again in the future. Is that what I understood you to say?
No, they're developing an insurance product that would be available for purchase by user groups.
Okay, by user groups.
Yeah.
Okay.
The MIA is actually expanding, so and it's actually been very successful in terms of how it manages our insurance requirements. So that is something that's available. I think this was born out of the concern from one group,
right,
coming forward and saying, hey, you know, we have limited volunteers. We'd rather spend our time planning the actual event than raising money just to cover our insurance costs. And so, of course, we approached it from a policy perspective. And as much as I would love to argue against staff on their recommendation, I'd be hard-pressed to do so. I think it does have a lot of logic and sense behind it. However, you know, there may be other ways that we can approach this by way of a grant or something if it's specific to one group. And it really then becomes a question of how much we value those events, and if we feel that they should continue, are we prepared to do that? But that's a separate question. What I would be prepared to do, dependent upon how council votes here this evening, is go back to those folks, because I have had a conversation with them already on this, and say, hey, you know, if indeed you do not, or you support the staff's recommendation and not change our policy, I'll suggest to them that the policy approach may not work. Is there something else that we can do, and come back to you all at some time in the future?
Can I ask a question of you? I'm reading this correctly. It's only $300. Is that correct?
I haven't verified that, but it does appear to be
says
probably.
That in the report.
Yeah.
There is a website available that provides insurance quotes for organizations. And so I went into the website and I plugged in the kind of numbers that Friends of Foster Park would use for their pumpkin walk with 600, using a number of 650 participants, with the majority of them as children, and the kind of in a public park and an outdoor venue, and that was the figure that came up for the insurance.
So I'll take that information back with me, and we'll talk further, and I'll come back to council perhaps at the next council meeting if there is a need to carry on, and I'll leave it in your hands.
And I would, sorry, Your Worship, I'm not quite finished. I would like to request that you also provide them with the grants and aid information, because that is a tool that we already have available to community groups, and then we're not setting a precedence.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The $5 million is kind of a going rate. I know we pay that for our hockey tournaments, and the amount I think is around $300 or $400 that we pay. But it's a going rate. You're expected to carry $5 million today. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Further discussion. Now again, did we get that recommendation on? I don't believe, yes we did. Okay, so seeing no further hands in the air, all those in favor? Opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. All right, while you're on a roll, our Director of Administrative Services can provide us some information regarding the appointment of the 2014 election officers, now inside a year. My goodness, we're now officially in an election year. Well, maybe not an election year, but inside a year. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
Well, Your Worship, it's that time of year again, and we are coming into 2014 as a local government election year. Staff are beginning to work on the planning processes for the coming election, and so feel it would be an appropriate time to designate your Chief Election Officer and Deputy Chief Election Officer.
And we have a motion, or rather a recommendation to that effect, moved by Councillor Morison, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our notice of motion section. Now, I know that Councillor Powell-Davidson is following up with a notice she gave last week. Are there any other notices in advance of her presentation from council members? Seeing none, then I'm going to ask you, Councillor Powell-Davidson, could you give us the background on your notice of motion regarding pop-up libraries?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll invite you first to look at the screen. I have two photos that are going to come up here. The first photo is a picture of kind of a birdhouse little structure on a post, and that's located in Qualicum Beach. The second picture that's going to come up is kind of like a little, what I call a telephone booth structure, and that's located in Vancouver. You'll notice by proximity the two people sitting beside it. These are small, and if you can look closely enough, you will see that they are built to house books. Pop-up libraries, or little libraries as they are sometimes referred to, are a relatively new trend in communities, and they are successful, they are successful in these communities in that they are placed in and around community gathering places. They enhance community building, clearly supporting literacy because they are books. The concept behind this is take a book or give a book, and that supports recycling of our books. Now, Qualicum Beach has 3 of these, and they are very successful. Vancouver has several throughout their communities. None of these 2 communities, and they are at present the only 2 I've really researched extensively, have reported any vandalism of any kind, which isn't to say that it won't happen, just that it's not happening in their communities. I first heard about this concept a few months ago, and I put it up on social media, and it received with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm over from various residents, and I was hoping somebody would take the charge on it, and we would get some happening here. However, it didn't happen, so I thought, well, we're leaders in this community. Who better to lead the charge on a pop-up library in Parksville than a community leader? So I've spent a lot of time lately approaching people. I don't see this as being something the city should enter into all by its own self, because we have resources to consider and staff time and all the rest of it, but I see it as a community project. So I've had discussions at Bolinas High School. The teacher of the woodworking course is very excited to bring their students on board to build pop-up libraries. I've had discussions at the staff level and ascertained that it would be approximately $100 to install one of these, and the staff would be willing to assist us with site selection. I've had discussions with Scott Signs, who, as you know, is the local company that does the signage for the city of Parksville, about possibly contributing the design, because me and others that I've discussed this with feel that the overall form and character of the pop-up library for Parksville should, in fact, look like something that it resembles our community, and our signs around town are kind of the standard format, and so constructing a little pop-up library that looks somewhat like our signs would be what we'd be looking for, and Scott Signs is indeed considering that request. It is my intent to approach other organizations, such as possibly the Oceanside Development Construction Association or businesses to contribute materials. And I'm hoping that by having you pass my motion this evening, the City of Parksville will get the ball rolling with one pop-up library, a pilot project that I would love to see down in the community park, ideally along the boardwalk. And then I'm hoping that other organizations, the Downtown Business Association would like to see one downtown, perhaps the Resort District one out there, or Chamber have one somewhere. Regardless, I am proposing one pop-up library in the community park, and here's my motion. Recommendation that Council support the creation and maintenance of pop-up libraries in the City of Parksville using the services of the students and other volunteers, and that staff be requested to work with me, Councillor Powell-Davidson, to choose the appropriate city-approved sites for installation of the libraries, and an estimated installation cost of $100 per library, with funds to be provided in the 2014 operating budget. And further, that the form and character of the pop-up libraries be modeled on the Welcome to Parksville signage depicting a rustic cedar, I will add the word cedar, chalet in there. I should mention that I've also spoke with the libraries, and they're also very supportive of this project. And as they did in Qualicum Beach, the libraries assisted with the beginning stock up and, as needed, continual stock up to fill the pop-up libraries with books and magazines that have been de-accessed. And I'm open to questions.
Well, let's get the motion on the floor. So
Okay.
You've made that motion. Do we have a seconder? All right, so seconded by Councillor Morison. So it's on the floor. Did you want to just open it up to questions, Councillor Powell-Davidson? All right, so I see two hands, but I'll give it to Councillor Morison as the seconder. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought the idea of it was quite nice. I'm not sure having the form and character condensed. I thought the best way to go about it would be to open it up to the fabulous artist community that we have here and have them. I much prefer the top one that has the colorful hand-painted kind of character to it. As far as the paying for costs, there's several benches, I believe, that are memorial. This is the kind of thing I think would go well in that respect if you had a certain amount that people could put a small brass plaque on there as a memorial and maybe the artist's name on there, and you'd cover all the costs. That's the only things I had at this point.
Do you think you would support the motion as it stands right now?
Well, the motion as is worded and it leaves it open to doing several of these. I know it's just a test one at this point. I don't mind doing a single one as it stands at the moment, but I think there are ways to recover the cost without the city paying for it.
Okay. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's a good idea as well, and they look very pretty and very nice, but I would certainly not be in favor of the city putting any money or time into it. I'm sure this is something that an organization should take over. As Councillor Morison said, maybe the artists in the community might come up with suggestions, or maybe a memorial might be a good idea. Anyways, there's lots of good ideas for people to get involved, but I certainly don't think the city should spend any money or time on it. Thank you.
May I clarify, Your Worship? I'm not suggesting that the city pay for the development, construction, or supplies. I'm simply looking at the city as buying in as a partner at a cost of approximately $100 to install the items. And my rationale behind that is, number one, I do want to see the city lead a community partnership, but I also would like to see these things installed to city standards. I'm not comfortable just leaving the installation of a project like this up to just anybody, especially if it's going into our community park. So I would want to see it done in the way that we install other things within the city. And certainly, I do agree with you. This should be a community project. And as I said, the community is definitely very engaged in this already.
Well, I personally love the project. I think it's great, and I'll certainly support it. However, I'm counting votes here, and I'm not convinced we've got enough. So would you be potentially open to an amendment to your motion, which would essentially go more to what you said, which is to establish a pilot site with a pilot project of one, and then use that as a rationale to proceed further? Or do you want to keep your motion as it is?
No, I'm absolutely open to amending this motion as long as the project goes forward and that the city is involved as a partner in the project.
Councillor Neufeld, any thoughts?
The only thought that I have, excuse me, Your Worship, thank you very much for asking. Scott Signs, I know Earl Scott, nice person, does a nice job, and the work, as far as the rustic chalet is concerned, I could see him doing something, but the cost is going to be significant with respect to this pop-up library. So I really get concerned about the cost of these pop-up libraries. I would like to see one. We'll go forward with it and see how it costs, see how the installation goes, and then do an analysis of the results. And I think that it's going to be beneficial to the community. But let's look at one at a time and see where it flies. Thank you.
All right, I'll go to you. Well, just give me a second here. I'm a little ahead of you here. And then I'll go to Councillor Greer and then certainly yourself. I'm looking at our staff here. Could we suggest an amendment? Okay, all right. Go ahead, Councillor Greer, and then to you, Councillor Powell.
Well, the other comment I would make when it comes to the cost, once the city gets involved, and it's the same story in many things that we do, we end up with the maintenance as well. And there's no way of getting around that. And there's no sense of starting something that isn't going to be looked after. The city does a great job at looking after things, and I'm thinking of Nichols Park as an example. We've spent a lot of money and a lot of time in there. I don't think it was quite supposed to be that way. However, that's the way it ended up. And this is another program that we might be on the hook for maintenance. And if there is vandalism, who's going to look after it? So if the city is a partner at all, then they're going to end up with a fair number of cost in the long run. I know the idea is to have one to see how it goes, but if it goes well, which I assume it might, then the city's going to be on the hook maybe for another half a dozen. So with that, I'm not going to support it.
Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Good grief, you'd think I was asking for the freaking moon here. I don't know why you're not listening to me, people. The costs are not going to be significant. I have approached Scott Signs simply to contribute the design of it so that the students at Bolinas can construct it. There's nobody coming to the city for any money except for the installation cost. The reason I approached Scott Signs is because they did the design of our city signs, but certainly whatever these things look like will be up for discussion. But you've got to start somewhere. You've got to have a design and you've got to have an idea in mind. As far as if they get damaged or torched or crazy little people move inside of them, I mean, goodness, all it is a little building sitting on a stick. We take it down. It's not that big of a serious issue. And the community, everybody that I've spoke to, and is very, very excited about this prospect. We're talking, something that's being done in many communities very, very successfully, and their cities are leading it. They are putting them in. This is very much being proposed to you as a community project. Let's go forward with one and try it out. Let's think outside of the book box for a while.
Thank you for that. Would we have a proposed amendment should one be, say, brought forward by the mover that would give some members of council assurance that this is a trial? Although I suspect you're quite correct, it would probably be very successful. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship. For the second paragraph of the recommendation, and that staff be requested to work with Councillor Powell-Davidson to choose an appropriate city-approved site for installation of a library at an estimated installation cost of $100 with funds to be provided in the 2014 operating budget.
Is someone willing to move that amendment? Moved by Councillor Neufeld, seconded by Councillor Morison. So this is now just on the amendment to the main motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? All right, that's carried. So now we're back to the main motion as amended, which would give council some assurance at least that we're moving forward with this as a single trial, and then we'll carry it forward from there. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Very good. We'll see our first pop-up library on the waterfront in all likelihood. And I certainly enjoyed them in Qualicum Beach, actually, and I noticed a lot of folks were quite enjoying them. All right. We're almost 8 o'clock. Moving on to new business. Does any member of council have any new business? So I see 2 hands up in the air. We'll start with, you beat Councillor Neufeld to your hand, so go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson, and then Councillor Neufeld.
Oh, just a couple of things, Your Worship. It's been extremely busy the past couple of weeks for me, but I won't go into everything I've been up to. Just want to say I did attend the chicken presentation that the 4-H Club put on, and we really missed you there, Al.
I think the chicken were happier he didn't arrive.
Yeah. The kids were holding the chickens just great. And I have to say it was a wonderful afternoon, a wonderful energy. The 4-H kids really did a great job. They put a ton of work into it. And it was well attended. In fact, there seemed to be a lot of interest in hosting another one. And I've been getting emails from people all over the island asking me how it went. So, there's some energy there. And I was really proud of the kids. They did a great job. The other thing...
How many kids were there? There was a fair number.
At least a dozen.
Yeah, I'd say about a dozen.
And not one of them had the same looking chicken. It was fascinating. Chickens actually make good pets. Who knew?
How many were there to learn how to keep chickens?
It was
an open house, so yeah. I did see some residents coming through. It wasn't in any great number, but I did see some residents coming through during the time that I was there.
That's too bad.
And
we need a lot of chickens in town, I think.
Yeah. I stayed later, and there were more people came around halfway through. The other thing I want to do is give a huge shout out to the Parksville Volunteer Fire Department for their very successful food drive this weekend. I believe, Chief, the records were broken, were they not?
That's correct. The members over the Saturday and Sunday were able to collect approximately 23,000 pounds of food and toys and about $4,800 in cash donations for the Salvation Army for the food bank. As well, Qualicum Fire Department was out. I haven't heard what numbers they got, but they were having to bring in their quantities. They were running out of room to store it. And Dashwood Fire Department was out as well. So I think a very successful weekend for the Salvation Army Food Bank.
Very good on the departments, certainly our department, and it's a little bit of a reflection on our community as well, isn't it? All right, does that conclude your... All right, go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I attended the Parksville Beach Festival Society on this past Tuesday evening, and all I wanted to do is make comment about some of the ongoing rejuvenation of that society. There have been a number of resignations from the Society Board. Notably, Joan Lemoyne has decided to retire again, and Judy Van Sweeten. Plus, some directors have taken on new responsibilities, such as Leslie Phillips moving from treasurer to vice president of the Society. And this may be, in fact, looking at some manpower planning and moving on if Cheryl should ever leave. In addition to that, Kirsten McLean is taking over from Joan Lemoyne as the volunteer coordinator director, and what we've been able to find are a number of new directors to take up vacant positions. One being Rob Jonas, who will serve as treasurer, Karen Akins, who will be the director for judging and finding proper appropriate judges, and Tim Alex, who will join with Jim Hoffman as far as a site manager director. Ruth Jones was also another person who will be joining the board. So they have now a pretty complete board, and they're quite happy with the people that they have on there. It's looking pretty good, and they're going forward with what they consider to be another spectacular year in 2014. That's the first thing. I have a second thing that I wish to bring up, and actually it was a little bit of new old business, and I will be distributing, and I've given the material to Sarah for copying, and the stuff on road diets. And I will be passing out, or having some stuff passed out with respect to what is happening across Canada with the elimination of some space on roads and the effect that it can have on the improvement of the downtown area. I would ask you to read it when it comes up, and you'll receive it within a day or two. But it's really significant, and it is not only occurring within Canada, it's also occurring around the world as far as the reconfiguration of travel and who has the use of our roadworks. And so I would ask that you have a look at the material, and I will ask in the future to have our engineering department possibly do some work with the very simple road count on what occurs, say in two spots as far as the highway, at least the old island highway is concerned. And that is the end of it. And hopefully we will come up with some kind of a decision, I think a more appropriate decision in my opinion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, no further new business. Let's just move right along to adjournment. And it is something I've noted that during the time that we've spent here this evening, we have warmed the room somewhat, have we not? So, with no further ado, motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Morison, seconded by Councillor Greer. All in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.